Hey everyone, in this video I'll show you how you can use FiveM Resource Watcher to build a GitHub pipeline for your FiveM server. Once it's set up, it will allow you as a server owner to have a Git Managed workflow for your server where you don't actually need to provide access to the VPS or dedicated server or even txAdmin console to your developers. They'll just have to push the changes to your resources to GitHub, and then the pipeline that will build, it will automatically pull those changes into your server, and then it will restart those resources or restart the server automatically so they don't have to do anything. So to do that, there are some prerequisites that you need to have. The first thing, of course, is for you to have is the server resources inside of a GitHub repository. So as long as you have a repository that has your server resources and you have cloned this repository both on your local machine and also on your VPS server, we can start the setup process for the pipeline. The first thing that you'll need to do is open up that repository on your local machine, go to server.cfg, and then right after, or maybe right before you start ensuring the resources, you can add rcon password, and then you can set a password here. This needs to be super secure because this will allow the pipeline to run commands remotely on your server, like restarting resources or restarting the server. And by server, I mean the FiveM server, not your actual physical server. So make sure that this is secure. For me, I'll just type in a super simple one for this demo, and I'll just type in password. So once you've done that, you need to push this to the repository, push this change. I'll just push it through the command line here, and we have that. So once the rcon password is set, you need to pull this change that you've just made to your remote server and then restart the server as well. For Linux, it's pretty simple. You open your terminal up, you SSH onto the machine, and then you go into the folder where you have the repository cloned, and then you just run a git pull. So I have that change now. Once that is done, you need to restart the server. So I'll just close it up and then I'll run it again. While this is being done, I will do the same thing for a Windows VPS. So I have this Windows VPS that's running right now. It has the same repository that's running. What I'll do is I'll open that up. I'll go to C, and this is where I have the server resources repository cloned. I'll right click here, or I'll shift right click here. I'll open a PowerShell window, and then I'll just run git pull, the same command that I used. Once that is done, I'll restart the server. And for doing that, I'll just press restart. And yeah, that's the first part, and it's done. So I'll go back. So the next thing that you'll need to do is, if you're running Windows, you need to set up SSH, which is super important. And in order to set up SSH, you need to go to this FiveM Resource Watcher GitHub, scroll down, and again, all of the documentation and everything that I'm just talking about, it's already laid down here. So you can follow this guide if you get stuck anywhere. So what you'll need to do is connect to your RDP, which I've already done. I'll copy this link. I'll go back to the VPS. I'll open a new tab and I'll paste it here. So I have this OpenSSH server downloaded. I'll just run it. And yeah, it's super quick. It's gonna install OpenSSH for me. And yeah, that's done. The next part is to run this specific command on the VPS so that the VPS allows access to SSH remotely. So I'll go back to the VPS. I'll run PowerShell. I'll right click and run as administrator, and then I'll paste the command here and press enter. And yeah, that part is pretty much done. So now that you have set up SSH as well, the next thing that you'll need to do is configure some of the secrets. this will be your IP of your server, your your password that you use to log into your server, and your rcon password that you've set. So in order to do everything, you need to go into your resources repository, go into settings, click on secrets and variables, and then click on actions. Then click on new repository secret, and here I'll just set up those variables that have been defined in here. So the first thing that we need is the SSH host. In this case, I'll start with the Windows machine. So the host will be the IP of the Windows machine. And the IP of the Windows machine, I believe, is, let me confirm. Yeah, it's this one. So I'll just copy this IP. I'll paste it here, remove everything else, and add secret. Then I'll set up another one, which is the password for the machine. So SSH password. And then you can set a password for this. I'll just set a password. The next secret that you need is the rcon password, and it should be the same as what you've set in the config file. For this example, we're using this simple password, so I'll just copy this, paste it here, and add secret. So now that we have all the required variables for Windows, what we can do is we can proceed with the next step, which is that you need to scroll down to the part where it says configuring pipeline, and then you need to copy all of this and go back, create a new folder in server resources called GitHub, create another folder inside of the GitHub folder called workflows, and then you need to create a new file inside of it called sync.yaml, and you need to paste everything in there, just like that. So before pushing this, you need to do a couple of things. The first important thing is the repository path. This is where you have your server resources repository cloned on your remote server, on your VPS. So in my case, if I go back here, it was under C and then server resources. This is where I have my Git repository. So I'll click here, I'll copy this path, I'll go back, and I'll make sure that I have this path updated. And yeah, there it is. The next step is to change the username. In case you're using a specific user, you need to change it here. For me, it's administrator, so I don't need to change it. The next step is to, if you're using a different port for the SSH, in my case, I don't need to change it because I'm already using port 22, which is the default one. So you don't need to change anything here. The last part, which is the most important one, is to set the server port. This is like what port your FiveM server is running on. So by default, it uses 30120, and yep, I'm not changing that. The last part is to change this variable called restart individual resources. This means that if you set it to true, it's going to restart individual resources that you've made changes to instead of restarting the whole server. It really depends on your use case whether or not you want to restart the whole server or restart only the resources when you made a change. I'll set this to true so that it only restarts individual resources and not the whole server. So once you have everything configured like this, you commit and push those changes. And once those changes are pushed, you can come back to your action or repository, go to actions, and then see if something broke. And it looks like there's a small error. So yeah, it's the repository path. You might run into this issue when you're copy pasting the path, but make sure to change the backslash to a forward slash. Once that's done, you commit and push the changes and come back, go to actions again, and you'll see that the pipeline is going to start. And we'll wait a little bit for this to finish. If you click on pull remote changes, you can actually see that a git pull command was run on your remote server and it automatically added that file that I pushed to this repository and it synced it on my VPS. So now there is a GitHub folder and there is this workflows folder where I have this sync file. So it automatically did that. And then in restart resources, it says nothing to restart, which means that no changes were made to any of the resources, which is exactly as expected. So now the whole pipeline is set up now. Let's try it out. So let's say if I wanted to make changes to QB ATMs, let's say I change the daily limit for QB ATMs to like 1000 or something. And maybe I even want to make changes to QB garages. I change the name of this. So I just change it to motel, for example. And so I made changes to two resources. I pushed those changes and take a look at what happens in the server console. So right now it's running, it's not doing anything, right? The server is up and running. But in a few seconds, it's going to automatically restart those two resources that I've made changes to. And if I come here to server resources repository, go to actions, you can actually see this happening right there. So if I want to, I could just look at those and see what's happening. And yeah, in pull report changes, you can see that the two changes that I made were automatically pulled. And then it restarted both QB ATMs and QB garages. And just to make sure that it really did that on my live server, I can come back here and you can see that those two commands were actually run on the server and they were updated and they were restarted as well. And the changes that I made in here, they actually reflect in the VPS as well, which is really cool. Now all you need to do is just push your changes to GitHub and all of your changes will automatically sync and be restarted in txAdmin. Yep, that's good. So the last part is configuring the same thing but for Linux. It's again also really simple. You need to follow the exact same process but with some minor changes. So you'll go to settings, secrets, actions, and the main thing that you'll need to change is the SSH host. That should be the IP for your Linux server, of course. So it's this one. I'll paste it here. I'll update the secret. Of course, you'll create it. And then in this case, I'll show an example where I'm logging in through an SSH key instead of the password. If you're using a password, it's fine. You could just update this password and you should be good to go. But in case you're using an SSH key, you need to add SSH key in here and paste in the SSH key. So yeah, I just added an SSH key. I'll remove the password. I'll say yes. And then I will come back to the workflows file. And there are a few changes that I need to make here. Since I'm using a key, I'll change the key, or I'll actually start using a key and I'll comment out the password so that I'm using the key instead of the password. The other thing that I need to change is the username. I'm logging in as root for Linux. And then the last thing that I need to change is the path that's here. And on my Linux server, I have the path set to this for my Linux resources. So I'll just type in pwd to show me the full path. I'll copy this path, I'll come back, I'll paste the full path here. So after you've made those changes, you need to just run the commit and push commands. And then this is my Linux server running FiveM, and this is the txAdmin console for that. Now, if you go into the actions again, it's running the pull command, so it changed pretty much everything. And yeah, it pulled the changes, but since you've just set it up, you'll need to first restart the server. Once that's done, then you can come in and make your changes. So for example, for apartments, let's say I wanted to disable starting apartments, I'll just set it to disabled. And then for banking, let's say I want to enable or disable target, so I'll just set target to false. And then I'll push those changes. So now it's going to restart QB apartments and QB banking on my Linux server instead of my Windows server. So let's look at the pipeline again. And you can see that it only takes about 30 to 40 seconds. It really depends on your size of the repository. And yeah, if you have a lot of assets as well, it might take 1 or 2 minutes, depending on how long it takes to clone. So yeah, it pulled the changes to QB apartments and QB banking, and it restarted both resources. And now it did it on the Linux server, and the Windows server is not doing anything because we have connected it to our Linux server instead. And yeah, this is how you basically use this pipeline to automate your workflow for updating your resources.